everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frate Eleftheria, and in this video I'm going to cover some internet occult news, you could say, that broke over the last week, which has been causing quite a stir in certain communities, which is that a very popular tarot reader has recently shocked the internet by announcing her conversion to Christianity. And I'm, of course, talking about Alex Reid's tarot. As I said, Alex was a very well-known tarot reader and was so famous, in fact, that she'd even been referenced in the lyrics of Love Me Different by Hayley Williams. And so this is the latest example of somebody who has come from a New Age or occult background, suddenly and very publicly announcing that they're leaving their old life behind and they're converting to Christianity. And the reactions from people online have been off the wall. There's clearly a lot of people that are very upset and very triggered by Alex's decision based on the way that they're acting. And in some ways this is not a new story, and a lot of the topics of conversation that have come about as a result of Alex's actions relate to the existing conversation on the New Age to Jesus pipeline, or the witchcraft to Jesus pipeline, as it's often called. But there's other things that are just different about this one. Different in terms of how Alex comes across as the person who is leaving behind their old beliefs to embrace Christianity, but also in terms of just the reactions from people and how visible those have been, and how many of them there have been, have really added another layer to the conversation this time. So I wanted to explore this a bit more, because I think there's a lot here that is worth having a look at beyond just internet drama. And I thought I should comment on the Alex Reid's tarot situation for a number of reasons. First off, I've commented on the pathway from New Age or occultism to being saved, inverted commas, on this channel before, in a react video that I did to Doreen Virtue, saying some very nasty things about Reiki. And I discussed the phenomenon more broadly, and it allows me to build upon some of the issues that I brought up in that video. And I'm not going to revisit the things that I spoke about, the reasons I believe that people go from something like New Age or occult to Christianity. I stand by what I said in that video. I'll leave a link in the description below if you're interested in seeing my thoughts on that. But in a certain way, my views on the matter have changed. Not necessarily that the views are different, but that I've deepened my understanding of certain aspects of this phenomenon and the complexities of it, which I'll talk about tonight. I also want to comment on this because I have a unique perspective, I believe, on Alex's situation, the situation in her community. That is because I kind of can see things from both sides. Like many in the online tarot community, I was disillusioned with Christianity when I was younger and was drawn to the occult as an alternative spiritual scene where I felt I could find the acceptance and openness that I didn't receive from the mainstream church, at least not to the degree that I expected to receive it. And by the same token, I'm like Alex and others like her in that I've ultimately, as I have moved into occult circles, then grown to be disillusioned with the occult alternative spiritual scene. And in my soul searching to find out what went wrong, what it was that I disliked about those groups and those people, eventually came back to the figure of Christ as the thing that was missing, somebody who embodied all the things that were missing from those other people, and who could offer a solution to the existential spiritual problems that I was facing. In my case, though, I went back to more of an appreciation for the figure of Christ, but I was not saved. I didn't go through some conversion at an evangelical church and burn all my occult books and all of that. I've still got a plenitude of occult literature right behind me that's not going anywhere. And much of it inspired by people like John Dee, who were Christians themselves and occultists, and managed to make both of those things work for them. But I haven't reverted back to something like that. But I don't fit comfortably into either camps, but I do feel that I can see both sides. You know, this seems like it's been a very polarizing conversation, so maybe that's something, a perspective like that is needed. You know, like any good magician, I like to think that I can straddle multiple realities and move between different worlds and points of view, and I believe that I can do that again in this case. Another reason why I want to cover this is because the overwhelming majority of React videos that I've seen have been full of nastiness and negativity. And I want to add to the small number of constructive responses to Alex's very public conversion. And I also believe that there are some things to be explored more deeply in the controversy that Alex has caused, as it seems to have brought the inner demons, perhaps allegorically, perhaps literally, of many people to the surface in quite a profound way for all to see. And it is therefore a chance to contemplate our own challenges and learn some lessons for our own inner work, which I hope as serious spiritual practitioners, whatever walk of life, whatever spiritual philosophy we adhere to, we can at least agree that that's something that's worth doing, that inner work. So that's what I'm going to start talking about. So first of all, I want to talk about when I first saw this story break. And when I did, my first thought was, oh, it's another one of these, a very public conversion from the occult or New Age to Christianity. And I felt a bit of trepidation at that point. I reserved my judgment, but I just knew that this could go a bad way, as sometimes it has in the past. Like Doreen Virtue is probably the example of like a worst case scenario of somebody converting to Christianity from the New Age and how to really make yourself look bad to other people. Doreen Virtue swung to the opposite extreme. She viciously attacked and continues to attack any spiritual practice outside of fundamentalist evangelical Christianity as something that is demonic and evil. And I hoped that this was not going to be another example of that. But I knew that I had to, before I made a judgment, I had to see the original video for myself, not people's commentary on it, not anything else. So I found Alex's original video and I watched it. It was very short, and what I saw surprised me. It wasn't what I was expecting or perhaps fearing at all. This is not comparable to the Doreen Virtue situation at all, in my opinion. In the video, where Alex talks about her decision, she's being very sincere about her spiritual journey. She is very clear that she's not trying to preach to others about what they should believe. She is just talking about her own personal journey. Fine, no problem with that at all. She says that she's not going to be creating any more tarot content. I believe she took the videos down or hid them, or maybe she started making some other videos. I'm not quite sure where that sits. I haven't looked too much into it. But she said she's not going to make any more tarot content. She expresses gratitude to the people who entered her life in the tarot community. It's always a good thing. And she finishes the video by saying to her audience, "I love you all very, very much." And I don't see anything wrong with any of that. This isn't a vile Doreen Virtue renunciation. This is something very different. This is something heartfelt and genuine, and coming from a place that is certainly not trying to be antagonistic to people who don't believe in Christianity. And I think that we need to give Alex credit for that, because she has been painted in a very negative light and caricatured by a lot of people reacting who are completely mischaracterizing what she's really saying. I certainly don't see anything wrong with what she's said. She's on a spiritual journey, and sometimes on our spiritual journey it leads us to places we didn't expect. She's explained her decision very clearly in a very respectful way, respectful to other people, and I think that she did well in the video, all things considered, because this could not have been an easy video for her to make. She's built up this massive following over years, and she's walking away from something that she's spent years building. And she held it together really well, considering that that's the situation. She even seemed like she had a kind of peace that she doesn't have in some of the other videos that she appears in over the year or so leading up to this one. And it just made me wonder, because I'd seen some of the reactions and I'd watched people talking about how she's suffering religious psychosis and she's She's attacking the community by joining the Christians who are attacking them, and like, just none of that is actually happening in the real world. Like, in reality, if you actually look at the video, none of that is happening. And so I wanted to understand why this is making such a big stir online. I wanted to understand that more. So I went and I had a look at some of the responses to her, and quite a few of them, to try and understand this more. So there's a lot of people who are really not putting their best foot forward as they respond to this public conversion. Let's talk about the Christians first. There have been certain Christians on Instagram, for example, gloating about Alex's conversion, celebrating in triumph as Team Jesus scores a great victory against Team Satan. But this response is incredibly off to me. There's a lot of people who have lost a spiritual figure that they could look up to, who brought a great amount of benefit to their lives, who's not going to be speaking to them anymore. And so that can be something that brings a lot of grief to people. And yet Christians are celebrating that that's happening to people, because they see everything in this black and white, like, fantasy novel way of, like, good versus evil, and they're the goodies fighting against the baddies, you know, slaying the dragons and all of that. But in actual fact, if you look at what's actually happening behind the fantasy narrative overlay of the Christians, the Manichaean, dualist, black and white narrative that they're colouring everything with, what's actually happening is that they're taking pleasure in something that has caused grief and a loss of direction, a loss of spiritual direction to a lot of people. And that's sinful. You might convince yourself that everyone else's beliefs are just a demonic deception, and your denomination of your religion is the only one that is true. But at the end of the day, actions speak louder than words or dogmas ever could. And the actions of these Christians are wicked. And with hypocrites such as these so prevalent in the church, these wolves in sheep's clothing, it's no wonder that so many people have left Christianity to try and find the belonging they seek in communities such as the Instagram and TikTok tarot community. However, I have to say, as bad and as cringe as the reactions of these Christians have been, the majority of unflattering reactions that I saw to Alex's news did not come from the Christians. They came from the people within this online tarot community. I saw a lot of posts which were just spreading gossip, and that's all that they really were when you boil down to it, just gossip. I saw posts of people saying that Alex should refund the people she gave readings to while she was questioning her beliefs. Like, you're not allowed to go through a period of questioning, you know, but before you come to a decision on something important like that, and then you must have been lying before. I mean, it's just a ridiculous point of view, and ultimately these people are just trying to get something for nothing, rather than honouring the hard work that spiritual creators put into their work. I saw a lot of people who claimed to be from a community that loved and accepted everyone, but who were not respecting Alex's personal choice and personal decisions about her spiritual path and the future of her spiritual path, who were mocking her or judging her or being condescending towards her just for wanting to follow Christ. And sometimes this was like overt, it was like a meltdown. But then there were other videos which in a way were even more chilling, where it took the form of something that these New Age types do, where they feign positivity, they pretend to be all love and light, when in fact there's something really malevolent underneath all of that mask. So you get people who are like, of course I respect your decisions, you do you, blah, blah, blah. I respect your autonomy, all of that. But you just haven't been the same this last year. There's something different about you, that your videos just haven't resonated with me. You don't have any light in you anymore. There's something different about you. And this kind of passive-aggressive, attacking and condescending. So you don't actually accept her beliefs. That was just you being manipulative. That kind of response makes me more angry than just the meltdown, because it also contains the seeds of manipulation and deceit and dishonesty. So in a way, it's more evil. those videos were quite unflattering for the people that made them. And so then there were other people who were saying that, you know, Alex was suffering from religious psychosis, and that's why this was happening. And again, this is like really out of line to say, I think. Religious psychosis is a very specific mental illness. You can look it up in the DSM-5. It's characterized by religious delusions, religious hallucinations, disorganized speech, and disorganized behavior. Disorganized speech and behavior, certainly didn't see that with Alex. As I said in her video, she was very composed and she articulated herself very well, which a person going through religious psychosis wouldn't be able to do. As for the delusions and hallucinations, well, that only makes sense to accuse somebody of that if you think that just Christianity is delusional, but your beliefs are not. How is that any different to what Christians say about people who believe things differently to them? I saw people mocking Christianity and mocking Abrahamic religion, calling Abrahamic religions, including Jewish religion, disgusting. I think the last time I saw somebody expressing disgust towards Jewish religion like this was when I watched some Hollywood film about Nazis. So check yourself if you have that level of hatred towards an entire group of people in your heart. I saw posts decrying Christianity for being a masculine-centered religion. God, how awful. Because everything masculine is bad and evil, and everything feminine is good and healing. What a prejudiced and unbalanced way of looking at the world. But again, these people say that they're the loving and accepting ones. Unbelievable. And I saw people accusing Alex of going to Christianity because she hadn't done shadow work, or she tried to confront her shadow and couldn't handle it. From what I've seen, it's these outspoken members of the tarot community who are so offended by Alex's decision. They are the ones who are so offended by Christianity, who have a chip on their shoulder. They're the ones that need to do more shadow work, from what I can see. It's called shadow work for a reason, because it's bloody hard. And the reason why I think I can say that is because once upon a time, I used to be in the category of people who had a big axe to grind with Christianity. And I was like that for many years. And when I integrated my shadow successfully, or at least certain parts of my shadow, that changed, and I no longer had such a big gripe against Christianity. And I stopped speaking about Christianity like the people on these video reacts speak about it. That's why I can recognize the shadow in them. I spent years having those attitudes. Then a few years ago, I did a magical working from the Book of Abramelin to confront the 4 princes of evil. It's one of the magical workings in that book. I traced a protective magical circle around myself, and for 3 days straight, I was taunted and attacked by demonic spirits who were dredging up every single fear and flaw and insecurity of mine that they could find in my unconscious. And the only way for me to get through that ordeal was by moving past a lot of shadow, not all of it, but a lot of my shadow in a very short amount of time. With support from my HGA, from my holy guardian angel. I couldn't have done it without that supernatural, frankly, support. And as I was going through this process, the final big source of darkness within myself that got brought up, that I had to face, the final boss, if you will, in that working, was my antagonism towards Christianity, stemming from how I had been tyrannized over by representatives of the Catholic Church in my youth. They deprived me of my agency, they devalued my original thoughts, and I had a lot of hatred and resentment towards them. You know, and I wanted to get my revenge on Christianity. And in this time in my life, my biggest role model was Aleister Crowley, who wanted to become the great beast 666, literally. So that gives you an idea of the animosity that I had. And so this animosity towards Christianity and the church, it was not just a part of my personality, but it was like foundational to my sense of self at the time. And that was the thing that I had to overcome in order to defeat my demons. But somehow, and I still don't know how, I managed to shed that resentment and pass the test. and decide to put that behind me. And at the end, I was given a beautiful vision of Jesus, and we embraced one another as brothers. And that was the turning point where I really began to intentionally rekindle a relationship with Christ. But I'm retelling this story to give an example of what integrating the shadow really looks like. I'm not necessarily saying anybody should do what I did, because I think it was probably an irresponsible way of dealing with the shadow now that I think of it. But we can do that work, and we must do it, however we choose to do that. And part of that for a lot of people is getting over their resentment towards Christianity. Their aversion towards Christianity is a long shadow that a lot of people have, particularly in alternative spiritual communities. In some cases, it leads to possession, having this bitterness and this hatred towards God festering inside you. I've been attacked by such people before. Maybe Alex converting to Christianity is her way of trying to integrate that part of the shadow in her own life. Maybe she's trying to redress a psychological imbalance that she had in the tarot community that she's now recognizing. Unlike the people in many of these React videos. And yeah, there was another person that I saw reacting who was bagging out Christianity. How could you follow a religion like that? Blah, blah, blah. Judging someone for a personal decision that they made based on their own personal discernment. And so this person wasn't looking good in my eyes. But then they said something which sparked some compassion in me towards them and highlighted some of the reason why they were saying the things that they were saying. And this particular individual said that Christianity was responsible basically for every bad experience in their life. You know, that's tough. That's, you know, when you can identify one group of people who are responsible for all the pain and suffering in your life, it takes a lot of work to get past that. That's, you know, that's a huge cross to bear. And you know, I could see the hurt in this person's face, and I'm sorry that they went through that. It doesn't excuse being horrible towards other people, though. And that's something I think we need to understand a little bit better. We need to see how you can be compassionate. You don't necessarily have to see another person who you're doing something that you disagree with to someone else as evil. You can have compassion for them, but you can have compassion for them and not excuse the behavior at the same time. I used to listen a lot to the last podcast on the left, you know, and there's one of the hosts on the show whose name is Marcus Parks, who's been through it. You know, he's suffered mental health problems that were really serious. He's suffered addictions that were really serious. And so he's gone through all of this, and he's, from that crucible of suffering, things and circumstances in his life, he's come out of that a wiser person, and he's given that wisdom on the show from time to time. And one thing that he once said, which really hit home for me, was mental health problems are not your fault, but they are your responsibility. And I think that is a hugely important statement for everybody to understand. I've had my own fair share of mental health problems, particularly in the last few years. You know, as I've been intensifying my own shadow work, that has come to the surface a lot more. And some of those mental health problems were because of other people. So, for example, I learnt or figured out that I had been the victim of years of narcissistic abuse by multiple people, actually. And coming to that realization, it broke me. You know, I was sick and miserable, like physically sick and miserable for like 5 weeks straight, trying to process that. And there's a choice that I had to make, which everybody makes in this sort of situation, where you can scapegoat other people for your problems and make their life miserable, or you can try and use the way you were treated as a motivation to be better to other people. You know, and the thing to understand is, no matter what choice you make, you can't change what happened to you. That's not going to change. You getting revenge or whatever is not going to erase the past or balance the scales so much that it's as though it never happened. This is always going to be something that happened. And so whatever decision you make won't change that. So then the only thing you have to consider when you're making a decision is, do I want this experience to shape me in a way that brings suffering into the lives of innocent parties that I encounter and keeps me miserable and in a state of negativity and feeling victimized and all of that, ultimately being selfish in the way that I'm grasping at ways to try and erase the pain by causing pain to other people? Or am I going to decide to be the cycle breaker? Am I going to recognize that this is something that is beyond my ego, that this is wrong not just because it happened to me, but because it happened and it's wrong for it to happen to anybody. So I'm going to make sure that the way that I behave towards other people is the opposite of that behavior. And so rather than revenge, it becomes about restoration, restoring the goodness in the world that you didn't get to experience, but other people should experience, because you would have wanted somebody to do the same for you. And ultimately it comes down to whether you can be plugged into some kind of like sense of higher purpose, or whether you're just stuck in the ego. And it is easier to be stuck in the ego. It takes a lot more work and a lot more strength to take the other path. But in the long term, it's the one that pays off more, because you have incredible relationships around you that you build. Whereas if you go the egotistical route, you just end up being miserable and bitter and alone at the end of your life, because you've treated everyone so badly that you've alienated them from your life. You can be a victim, but when a victim chooses the path of the ego, the path of taking their suffering out on another person, then they become the abuser and the cycle continues, and now they are part of the problem. But I do think that when we're looking at these dynamics between people and different communities, we have to see the whole person and recognize their whole story, rather than just the flaw in their personality that they're expressing at that moment. And when we can see the whole person, that in itself can temper the degree to which we judge them, the severity with which we might judge them. You know, and following this story has made me more compassionate towards groups of people that I really didn't have a lot of compassion for before, because they've been attacking me for the past 10 years, shifting culture in a way that makes my life a lot more difficult. So the fact that I'm able to view them a bit more compassionately now, perhaps that shows that I'm moving along in my healing journey. I hope I am. But I've also seen the convert to Christianity in a more compassionate light as well. And I've looked into Alex's story, and I've recognized that she's not just another Doreen virtue, and that not all of those people that are going through that faith journey are a Doreen virtue. And there might be reasons why they deserve compassion as well, because you don't just walk away from something that you've dedicated your life to for so long without there being a good reason for it, which is something that I want to get into now as one of the last points that I make tonight, because there must have been a good reason for this. And I was trying to understand this, and I was a little perplexed at Alex's decision at first, because I was looking at it too dispassionately, in terms of like that doesn't make logical sense in terms of like the actual beliefs and whether or not they're compatible. Doesn't she realize that was missing an important subtext? But it did make me consider how like it really is a dramatic thing to say that you're not doing any more tarot because you're becoming a Christian. It kind of implies that you can't follow Christ, you can't follow the Bible and still practice tarot, that somehow those things are mutually exclusive. And this is the thing that Christians push. They say that tarot is demonic, Christians should have nothing to do with it. But this is a really narrow and prescriptive view. You know, there's a common misconception that the Bible forbids divination altogether. It's simply not the case. Actually, the Bible does say things about certain forms of divination being forbidden for certain types of people, but it's not like a blanket ban. So, to be clear, in the Pentateuch, in the first 5 books of the Bible, it says that the practice of certain types of divination, which involve reading signs and omens, is forbidden. And it says that certain types of divination that involve trafficking with the spirits of the dead or familiar spirits are forbidden. Those specific forms of divination are forbidden. And what's more, they're not forbidden for everyone. They're forbidden for a specific group of people, which are the ones who made the covenant with God at Mount Sinai. So, unless you're a Jew, or someone who comes from one of the other tribes of Israel that hasn't existed for 2,500 years, and you belong to that group, and then B, you practice a particularly superstitious form of divination, or you practice a form of divination which borders on necromancy, in those situations, divination is forbidden. But it's not forbidden in other cases, not explicitly. And in fact, there's lots of points in the Bible where divination is actually used or referred to. So for example, Joseph of the Technicolor Dreamcoat fame had a special cup that he looked into to practice divination. And he was a righteous man of God and he practiced divination. The high priests of Israel practiced divination with the use of 2 stones known as the Urim and Thummim. You know, if you had astrological symbolism on your person or in your house and a Christian fundamentalist saw that, they would probably say that's a gateway for demons. You shouldn't have astrological stuff around your person at all. But the Bible itself is full of astrological symbolism. The 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 apostles, hello, what else is there 12 of? 12 signs of the zodiac? What about the 4 cherubs, the angels before the throne of God with the face of a man, a bull, an eagle, and a lion? They're the fixed signs of the zodiac. An eagle represented Scorpio back in ancient times. So there's astrology in the Bible. And then in the New Testament, when Judas is no longer one of the 12, and the disciples need to select someone to be his replacement, how do they do that? Through the casting of lots. Again, a divinatory practice. They're not asking God. They're not making a spreadsheet with the pros and cons. They're asking the lots, whatever that is, the bones that they're throwing, however they do that. That's divination. And so it's actually incredibly ignorant to say that you can't follow biblical religion and practice divination. If you're doing it in a way that is respecting the harmony of God's natural order, not trying to abuse it in some way, or misinterpret it, or second guess God's will in some way, or God's plan, then it's not sinful. And that goes for tarot as well. These cards, they're a tool, nothing more. They can be used for good or evil. And look, what's that on the back of the Rider-Waite deck? That's a cross. So, you know, there's another hint, there's another clue about the harmony between these things, if we allow it to exist. But I don't necessarily think that Alex was intellectualizing it quite as much as this. I think that for her to make this decision, there was something else that was happening underneath the surface. And I think that she was suffering. I mean, there was a video from several months back now where she feared legal action and she was crying and asking for help from the community. And she clearly didn't get the warmth or support that she needed from people. And maybe the warmth that she was denied from the tarot community was something that she found in the Christian community. And maybe she reached a point in her spiritual life where she valued that sense of community as something that was more important than a deck of cards. But to make such a dramatic choice, she was clearly suffering, and she was suffering because of a failure of her community. And it's sad to see that members of this community are not taking any accountability for their own role in driving Alex away in the way that they're responding to this. But it's definitely been eye-opening. I mean, I never knew, I suppose I must have known that there must be some kind of online tarot community, but I didn't know of it, you know, or the kinds of people that were in it until now, until this story broke. You know, and I'd actually been considering doing my own tarot readings for people, but before this point, and now I'm a bit more hesitant to do so. I mean, it would be a pleasure to do tarot readings for you lot, for my members, for the people that follow this channel, but the TikTok and Instagram community associated with tarot that I've witnessed is certainly not something I want to be associated with. That's not an energy that I want to invite into my life. But what do you think? If I offered tarot readings, is that something that you'd like? Leave your answer in the comments below. I'm still open to doing it, even after everything I've seen. As for Alex, I wish her all the best on her new faith journey. I hope she finds the spiritual healing and the spiritual purpose that she's looking for, and I only hope that she remains guided by her own personal relationship with Christ above all, the still small voice, not the voice of some pastor, and trust that personal relationship with the divine over and above any man-made dogmas of worldly churches. But there's certainly a lot to ponder from Alex's move away from tarot and the tarot community, and I hope I've explored some of those things more thoroughly in this video, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to my channel to support my work, hit the notification bell so you actually get notified of my new videos, hit join or thanks down below to support me further. Join my mailing list as well, please. And I am still promoting my book, The Voices Caelesti. I'll leave a link to that in the description below as well if you'd like to purchase a copy. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.